scientists should not force their ideas about dinosaurs onto the evidence when the evidence doesn't line up with their ideas. To reiterate again, as scientists, we should be careful to distinguish between what is factual and what is simply wishful thinking. Unfortunately, it seems that in an effort to substantiate their hypothesis that dinosaurs turned into birds, some are willing to promote anything labeled as evidence, even potential frauds. In the late 1990s, in the Chinese province of Liaoning, a group of supposed dino birds were uncovered. Well, one of these finds was Archaeoraptor. Archaeoraptor was announced in the November 1999 edition of National Geographic as, quote, the best evidence since Archaeopteryx that birds did evolve from dinosaurs, end quote.
Well, what the article did not reveal was information uncovered by CAT scans conducted in July of 1999, over 3 months before the National Geographic article was published. Performed by Dr. Timothy Rowe, the CAT scans showed that Archaeoraptor was concocted from the bones of at least 5 separate creatures, including the bones of a bird and a dinosaur, all smashed together to look like one creature. And, by the way, it was sold for $80,000 before being exposed as a fraud.
Ooh, wish my art sold for that much. Guess not everything made in China is cheap. Interestingly, a sign at the Dinosaur Zoo exhibit stated that China is an excellent location for discovering evidence of dinosaurs with feathers. Another sign there says that many of these have been found in a place called Liaoning, China. If you'll recall, Liaoning, China is the same place that the fake Archaeoraptor fossil came from.
Well, here's the view from the famous paleoornithologist, someone who studies fossil birds, Dr. Alan Fiducia, said about the fake fossils, quote, Archaeoraptor is just the tip of the iceberg. There are scores of fake fossils out there, and they've cast a dark shadow over the whole field. When you go to many of these fossil shows, it's difficult to tell which ones are faked and which ones are not. Journals like Nature don't require specimens to be authenticated, and the specimens immediately end up back in China, so nobody can examine them. There's no way to authenticate any of this stuff, end quote.
So remember the story of Archaeoraptor the next time you hear a big, groundbreaking news headline. Sometimes it takes scientists months or years to catch or admit their errors. Just last March, you might have seen this headline on many of the national news organizations. The claim was that inside this amber was a tiny dino bird skeleton. They had a video for it, they had an illustration and everything. Well, this is what they thought the animal looked like. Until they came back in July, just a couple months later, this was last year by the way, and said, oops, it just was probably just a lizard.
And of course, the story of the latest and greatest dino bird always seems to make front page headlines with cool illustrations and videos to prove their point, while the retraction admitting that the fossil wasn't real or was misidentified seems to, figuratively speaking, find itself being printed on the bottom right-hand page of page 23 that maybe, in the footnotes that maybe 10 people read. So that brings us back to the question that everyone is still wondering: what happens to the dinosaurs?
Hey, Aaron, we haven't talked about that incredible discovery yet.
Oh,
yeah, the fresh flesh-bound and fossil fragments.
You want to say that 5 times fast?
Not really. But in 2003, scientists led by paleontologist Dr. Mary Schweitzer discovered soft and stretchy dinosaur tissue and red blood cells inside of a Tyrannosaurus rex leg bone. This was a shocking discovery, as many people who believe that dinosaurs lived a long time ago, then all of the soft tissue and red blood cells should have decayed away long ago. Amazingly, after Schweitzer published her findings, many other scientists revealed that they too had discovered soft tissue in other dinosaur bones, but up until that point had been too afraid or apathetic to report their findings.
For example, in 2015, from the Imperial College in London, one team found numerous fossils with soft tissue still in them. What's even more amazing is that these fossils had been unearthed in Canada over a century before, and even then, these bones still had soft tissue in them. One of the scientists, Dr. Sergio Bertazzo, described how he made yet another find in this discovery in History magazine. Quote, "One morning I turned on the microscope and thought, wait, that looks like blood," end quote.
Additional analysis revealed that these red blood cells were original to the fossil and not the result of human contamination. These findings on previously ignored fossils could open up the door for scientists to look further into remains that they had never thought to look before.
Further, just last year, as reported in the National Science Review, researchers were studying a Hyperchosaurus skull and uncovered what appeared to be dinosaur chromosome and DNA fragments, still intact and visible under the microscope. There is no known scientific way for DNA fragments to survive for millions of years. One scientist, Dr. Evan Satai, who believes dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, acknowledged the impossibility of DNA surviving that long. Quote, "These organic materials are understood to be among the least stable biomolecules over long periods of time and under the heat of deep burial during fossilization. However, it is the extreme age of these samples that is striking. This fossil is at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude older than the expected preservation limits of DNA and proteins."
So here this scientist is saying that 75 million years is vastly too long for DNA fragments to have survived, and ultimately denies these spectacular findings. While he is wrong to deny the evidence before him, he does understand the obvious reality that DNA and chromosomes could not survive for millions of years. And these discoveries just scratch the surface of evidence of DNA found in supposedly ancient dinosaurs.
Now, you may be thinking that this evidence is causing some scientists to consider maybe our previous theories about dinosaurs were incorrect, and maybe they did not live that long ago.
Unfortunately, their starting point inhibits them from considering this. Instead, as a Discover magazine article matter-of-factly mused, quote, "This discovery indicates that blood cells and other cells might be preserved much longer in fossils than previously believed."
There it is. What they're saying is, don't readjust your theories to match the scientific evidence. Force the evidence to adjust to your theories. And needless to say, this is very bad historical science and has led to some serious suppression of scientific work.
Oh, and by the way, we brought some soft tissue samples with us. If anyone would like to come and get one afterwards, please feel free to do so.
Okay, let's move on to something else that is also very exciting. Carbon-14.
Carbon. Carbon is exciting.
Absolutely. What's amazing is that carbon dating dinosaur bones is totally challenging the conventional worldview. How, you ask?
Well, carbon-14 dating is complex, but for now I'll go give a summary of the process. In our atmosphere, there are several kinds of carbon, including carbon-14, otherwise known as C14. Now then, carbon-14 is radioactive, which in this case means that it is slowly decaying into nitrogen-14 through a process known as beta decay. All land creatures and humans breathe in air and eat living things that have taken in air from the atmosphere, which contains traces of C14. Thus, throughout the course of their lives, creatures will take in C14. However, once a living organisms die, they stop eating and breathing, generally dead things do that, and thus stop taking in carbon-14.
After death, it is assumed that there is no more incoming C14 to replace the C14 that is decaying. This is where the beta decay process comes in. When the carbon-14 atom decays, one of the neutrons in the nucleus splits into a proton and an electron. The electron is shot out of the nucleus as a beta particle, and the form of the previous carbon-14 atom is now turned into a nitrogen-14 atom. Next is where half-life is. Half-life is simply a fancy term for the time it takes for half of the carbon-14 to decay into nitrogen-14. So, according to this method, the time period for this is assumed to be around 5,730 years. So according to the method, if you had 2 pounds of C14 to start with, after 730 years,
5,000.
you would have
5,730.
30 years, you would have 1 pound left. This method is assumed to give the ages of once living creatures. Simple enough.
Now, when you do the math,
2, 3, 4, 5,
which we're not going to do here, we find that carbon-14 can only be used to date things that are at most 100,000 years old, as all measurable C14 would have decayed away by then. So if anyone ever tells you that C14 it proves millions or billions of years, realize that this is not accurate, as carbon-14 dating cannot give ages that old.
One article titled "Why We Don't Use Radiocarbon Dating for Dinosaur Bones" boldly asserts, quote, "Dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. To determine the age of a dinosaur bone, carbon dating can never be used. Carbon-14 only works for fossils less than 75,000 years old. By the time a dinosaur bone was found, any carbon-14 the organism would have taken up and incorporated into its tissues during its life would have decayed too much to be useful as a tool for determining its age."
So notice here that they didn't start with the scientific method. Instead, they started with an assumption that dinosaurs died off 65 million years ago, and because of that assumption, they then threw out the possibility of following the truth to wherever it leads, because of their predetermined world belief.
So all of this to say, if we were to find any amount of original C14 in dinosaur bones, that would show beyond doubt that these bones cannot be millions of years old scientifically. Well, once again, let's examine the evidence. In 2012, at a geophysics meeting in Singapore, German physicist Dr. Thomas Seiler presented groundbreaking findings from a research project he was a part of. Their team found not just small amounts, but large amounts of C14 in a multitude of dinosaur bones. In fact, using standard assumptions, the maximum age for these dinosaur bones would only be around 40,000 years old.
In 2015, another research project detected carbon-14 in 7 dinosaur bones. The study used 5 separate laboratories that all came to the same testing conclusion. There was a significant amount of carbon-14 in the fossils. In 2017, yet another study released by the Chicago Field Museum studying a Centrosaurus dinosaur fossil came to a similar conclusion.
Some have sought to argue that the C14 found in these studies wasn't actually in the original bone, but was the result of human contamination. However, this argument falls apart on several different levels. One, these arguments are only brought up because these new findings contradict the long age assumptions. Second, the laboratories conducting these tests use some of the strictest standards in removing contamination from these fossils. If people want to question these protocols for eliminating contamination, they'd have to throw out the entire field of carbon dating, which of course they would not do.
Third, in some of the testing, the C14 levels in some of the rock around these dinosaur bones have been shown to be decreasing, which shows that C14 is coming from and leaking out of the bones and not contaminating the bones from the outside. And fourth, the mounting evidence is overwhelming. Over 60 dinosaur bones have been found to contain carbon-14.
And note, the 40,000 year number is not the actual age. This is the maximum age of the fossils. Since we don't know everything about the original conditions in which the dinosaurs lived or everything that happened to the bones after they were buried, we cannot calculate an actual age of a given bone solely from C14 dating. Other factors actually point to a much younger age range. But what carbon-14 dating definitely has demonstrated is that science has shown that dinosaur bones are not as old as the traditional worldview demands.
So the bottom line from the presence of red blood cells, soft tissue, DNA, and carbon-14 in dinosaur bones is this. It is essentially scientifically impossible for dinosaur bones to have been formed millions of years ago. And that is very exciting.
Again, that's some really cool stuff, but I still want to know what happened to the dinosaurs.
Back to that question again, huh? Well, consider this thought about the implications of soft tissue and carbon-14 in dinosaur bones.
You probably should tell them since they can't read your thoughts.
Good point. So if science points to the fact that dinosaurs didn't live all that long ago, then is it possible that there may be some traces of dinosaurs in history? Maybe even alongside man?
Whoa, now you're really asking some far out questions there, bro. I mean, are you sure you don't want to, you sure you want to talk about that? I mean, maybe we can just end the talk, right here, but it's kind of too late. You already asked the questions.
Well, science is all about asking good questions.
Good point. Okay, I'm curious. What do we find?
Well, we can look at both historical writings and archaeological artwork. One of the oldest historical accounts of what some people believe may be a dinosaur is in the ancient Hebrew scriptures in a book called Job, written around 4000 BC.
In the 40th chapter of the book, there is a description of an animal called Behemoth. This creature is said to have been eating grass like an ox, was physically powerful, massive in its build, had bones like bars of iron, and lies under shady trees.
That kind of sounds like a football player, don't you think? Even the eats grass part.
Seriously, though, some people have examined this document and have said that Behemoth sounds like they could have simply been an elephant or a hippopotamus.
Well, let's read one more description of this animal in the historical document. It says of this creature that he moves his tail like a cedar. Now, in case you don't know, a cedar is a very large tree.
I guess that wouldn't be an elephant or a hippo. Or a football player, for that matter.
Right. Instead, it's possible from the description given that the behemoth was a long-necked sauropod dinosaur that the man called Job would have seen.
Now you may say, if so, then why didn't you just call it a dinosaur? Well, don't forget that the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841. Hence, we would expect people in the past to call dinosaurs that they would have seen by different names, including behemoth or maybe even dragons.
Amazingly, in very different cultures throughout the world, dragon legends are very abundant. Though often shrouded in fantasy, if you listen to the descriptions of these animals, they often make you think of what we would call dinosaurs today.
So, where did the dinosaurs go? Many scientists see evidence that around 4,000 years ago, there was a massive flood that totally altered Earth's surface and caused a significant change in the climate and may have helped reduce the dinosaurs' population. Aside from climate, as dinosaurs would spread throughout the Earth, and as people spread throughout the Earth as well, they would have killed many of the dragons for sport, defense, or bragging rights. I mean, after all, you wouldn't want to have a T-Rex, roaming in your neighborhood while you're mowing the lawn.
Dragons could have also made tasty barbecue sandwiches.
Interestingly, in some dictionaries as recent as the late 1940s, the word dragon was defined as an extremely rare, huge, and scaly serpent, lizard, or saurian. It was only in the mid-late 1950s that someone, for some reason, decided to entirely relegate the idea of dragons to a myth, despite tremendous evidence in history to the contrary. For example, during his travels in the late 1200s to ancient China, the famed explorer Marco Polo recounted that the emperor was raising dragons to pull chariots in his parades. Also, he stated that in a certain place there were huge serpents about 30 feet around and 30 feet long and about 8 feet around. Near their heads they had 2 small legs with 3 claws. Their jaws were wide enough to swallow a man, and no man or animal could approach them without terror.
There are also many pieces of artwork from all around the world that depict creatures of what look very much like dinosaurs. For example, engraved in a temple in Cambodia,